So Nick, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast. As I just said, I think you're the first Swedish guest on the podcast. It's really cool to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation about you and what you do and what we can learn from you.
Thank you so much, Jody. It's great to be here.
So Nick, maybe just for everyone listening, a little short intro about yourself, who you are, what you do, what you're about. Yeah.
Sure. I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I lived and worked the last 20 years in Southeast Asia. And I grew my career in the corporate world, making my way up, elbowing my way to the top, finding myself then quite isolated and lonely at the top. So I left the corporate world. Today, I'm working more in an entrepreneurial space. I'm a coach and mentor. I also do professional speaking, moderating, facilitating, and then also I'm running confidential peer groups and men's support groups.
Sure. So one of the things that interested me the most, right, about you and what you do is you wrote a book. Now, I will be honest, I haven't read the book, so feel free to educate me. But it's about a topic that I think doesn't get discussed often, the idea of loneliness. Why that? Like, why is that your interest, especially knowing that you've got this background that you've got?
Yeah, indeed. It's a topic not so often discussed, and that's exactly why I wrote this book, because I wanted to have a go at eliminating the stigma around discussing loneliness and also mental health and those topics. And by normalizing this conversation, really being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And in order for this to happen, we just need to continue talking about it. So I set out on this mission, actually, after I lost a friend, a good male friend of mine, a colleague of mine, who sadly was gone by suicide. And that happened in 2019, a year after I've had my own personal challenges, without having spoken about them, without having really fully dealt with them. That's when I decided to take action.
Like, I think the reason it interests me is there's this idea that we've got to be okay to be with ourselves, right? But at the same point in time, there's the idea that when we're by ourselves, we can be actually lonely and it's not good for us. How do you make sense of those two concepts, like being okay being with yourself versus when I'm alone, I'm actually lonely? What's the difference there?
Yeah, I think that we can be comfortable being with ourselves if we have cleaned up our past and we don't have any issues. Many of us carry so much baggage. There's so many broken relationships, so many things unsaid. There's so much pain in there. And these are the reasons why we're constantly looking for an escape, may it be with social media, drugs, or alcohol, or anything else we take to just try to disappear being in our own brain because it's so painful. And that's why we could be suffering being by ourselves if we don't have the house in order. I'm a believer of that we must go through and clean that up and fix the relationship. So there is no pain. There must be no regrets about the past. We need to make the past our friend.
It's interesting that you say that. Fairly recently, I had a conversation with a cricketer about something that's happened quite recently. So it's not even a past that's so far back. It's say a month or two ago. And how he's still dragging that potentially with him into his now, and the effect that has. Motivation's gone, passion's gone, no sense of direction. And so I think the idea of what you're speaking about, I understand it. I get it, right? But like, what's your own journey through that to have maybe that realization that we need to clean up the past?
Yeah, so I was constantly running and away from myself. That's why I'm now living in my 7th country. I moved around quite a lot, changed jobs quite a lot. And I don't know if it is because I was born and raised with two parents who changed house every 6 months. And maybe that I just want to keep the momentum going. But anyway, constantly being on the go, and then eventually, you know, not always leaving a country or a workplace in the best space, then you know you carry a lot of luggage. And I was also not grown up knowing how to discuss my feelings and how to deal with conflict and so on. And when I couldn't communicate and I left the office, you know, with perhaps some pain inside me, and I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, then my way of coping with it was either it could be through sport, which also can help, but many times in the end and down on my fall was alcohol. Alcohol became my friend. I went to see some friends in the bar, and it was quite common, especially as an expat, then that you go to the bar after work and you have a few drinks. But before I knew it, it became a habit. And after a while, it became an addiction. With that, I lost all my physical health. I stopped exercising. And just like what you explained, I lost my passion. I lost my purpose in life. I was disconnected. And then I was in a very isolated and dark space, which brought me to my knees. And I hit rock bottom in 2018.
Sure. What was that experience like? Like, how do you know when rock bottom is rock bottom?
It's different for everyone, and I'm glad to have survived it. But for me in 2018, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, basically. And I had, you know, lost my health, as I mentioned. And I remember being worried, knowing that I probably cannot go through this. I didn't think, honestly, that I could find a way out of it. I started to sign up for life insurances. I wrote my will, my testament. I cleaned up everything. I remember doing paperwork, putting in, you know, what are the bank accounts I have, and sending this to my parents, sending it to my ex-wife, and I even created an email for my son, who was then only 9 years of age, and I sent it to him. And I informed my ex-wife. I said, "Here's an email address for our son," and she was a bit surprised why I'd done that. And I said, "Well, here's the password for him, and maybe just keep it alive so he can look." And in there was also my details, you know, so he should be aware what is his split, if I should go or something like that. Not that I had much, but it was just that I really cleaned up everything. I didn't want to be a burden in my day-to-day life by telling someone I had a problem, and I didn't want to be a burden to anyone should I not go through with this. And I don't have any uh, memory of being suicidal. I think that would be probably too much of a big effort and big action for me even do. I just didn't have any purpose to do anything, and passion. So I was just lying in bed, and the turning point was when my left foot got so swollen that I couldn't put on a shoe. And I went and did X-ray, MRI, and they checked for gout and all kind of things, but they couldn't find anything. It was only later when a psychologist diagnosed it as a psychosomatic illness. So basically, I had so much pain and anxiety inside that it even started to show up on my outside. And that's when I had enough, and I decided to start telling one person as a start how I felt internally.
Sure. Thank you for sharing, right? I'm aware that there's always a driver behind behavior. Like, and you talk about the past being the pain and, you know, maybe brokenness there and things like that. What was sitting behind the behavior of the alcoholism, or, you know, giving life to that? What was the cause of that behavior?
It was simply that I didn't deal with anything, and didn't deal with any conflicts, any relationships. I didn't speak about anything. So, for example, I was in a really, really good job, heading up as general manager for medical services, running 72 hospitals and clinics in Indonesia. So a big job with hundreds of staff. And I was doing well in my job. But it was some parts of the job where I didn't do so well. And instead of being honest to my boss about this, instead of asking for help, or even myself finding some coach or mentor or sign up for some training to become better in that, I just let it slip. And with that came mistakes. I became anxious. And with that, I started to tell myself, well, because I made some of these mistakes, I'm sure they will terminate me. And that self-doubt started to kick in. And with that, I played it so many times in my head that, you know, I start to really think that I'm going to be let go here. When it was only me. So I thought I better resign instead, just to take control of the situation than waiting for be terminated. When I went into my boss and handed in the termination, they were completely surprised, shocked, offered other stations in other countries, and I was not ready mentally for anything. I just declined everything and just walked out of there without any plan for the future.
Often people might think that is more pressure, right? No plan for the future. How did you make sense of that at the time? That I've got this stuff on my shoulders, by the sounds of it, right? That I'm carrying with me, that I'm not speaking about. And then it's almost like I take myself out of that into even more uncertainty potentially.
Yeah, I didn't speak about anything in that job. I didn't really talk about the future. There was some opportunities here and there, and I jumped from job to job, and nothing really worked out. And with that, I became, even more anxious and more worried about the future. So indeed, I remember my father, trying to tell me that I shouldn't resign from that job. It was a fantastic company. In fact, it was the second time I worked for them, so obviously there was good chemistry there. So why I came to those conclusions is something that I cannot, now looking back at the situation, why wouldn't I speak to anybody about it? I just didn't have the toolbox. I didn't know how to talk about my feelings, so asking for help was something that just didn't exist in my life.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is, and what I'm sort of curious about is, there was this inability to do stuff, this inability to speak about things, the inability to reach out to people, hit rock bottom, as you say, and then what then? Like, how do you claw out of that? What's the first step?
Yeah, so that's what I have that in my book, because that's a question many people ask, because I had a V-shaped recovery, and many people ask me what happened, how did you manage to get out of it? And what I really did was I told one human being how I felt, and with that, as I say, it's a problem shared is a problem halved, and I was instantly feeling better than I had for many many months by just telling one person. And this person is today my wife. I'm remarried, happily remarried, and she took me to the doctor, shared my story there. Suddenly I was exposed twice, and again I felt better. And then after that we walked home to a friend of us who had some problems before with alcohol and the kind of behavior that I had also. And she gave me some phone numbers also from others who were willing to help. So within 24 hours, I was surrounded by support, people who were there, caring, listening. And from that day, by some miraculous reason, perhaps something bigger than myself, I haven't had a drink. I don't have any urge to drink anymore. And yeah, my life has just been better. It's like a completely different life from the life I had before.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing is people helped, reaching out to somebody helped. A few conversations on the podcast ago, and I think you referred to it before we started recording, I had a similar conversation or a similar experience, a similar story on the podcast. One of the things he mentioned was that it's sometimes difficult to reach out to people. So, because you don't know who you're going to harm or who you can trust, say, with a story like this. How did you know you could tell your now wife, then friend or girlfriend? How did you know that that was a safe place for you to go? Or did you just say, I've got no other choice?
I really didn't have any other choice, but it's something I'm speaking about a lot today. Is that I said we need to be proactive about building safe spaces, both personally and professionally. And we men, especially, are very bad at this by being open, vulnerable. And if we build this in the good times, and I'm doing this now, I learned it the hard way. I'm, for example, facilitating men's peer group where men who can discuss feelings and can discuss everything from insecurities. Sometimes we just discuss sleep or rest. Sometimes we discuss having a purpose or legacy in life. So we discuss all these topics on a weekly basis together, building relationships and reminding everyone, if you go through something difficult, then here is your moment to share it with everyone. And then in between during the week, we also have a group. Someone can raise a hand if they need to talk to someone, and we're there for each other. So if I have something on my mind, and I had something on my mind last week, I took the chance to share about it there, and we discussed it, and I felt much better after.
Men are taught to not share their emotions to a certain extent, right? Put the brave face on, be the warrior. Society at times validates and reinforces those ideas, that men are brave and they don't feel emotion. They run into battle fearlessly, I wonder what your take is on that.
Yeah,
that's your sense is about.
Yeah, indeed, that's the traditional way. And I had also my bosses in my first jobs, they were all like that, quite powerful, strong men, and they mentored me, and they taught me to show that we got to be strong. And I never saw any vulnerability in them. They really were leading with an iron fist. So once I became a general manager, and later on also managing director for a business, that's all I knew. And I combined that with some motivational talks. I read books on goal setting and so on, but that made me even more relentless, more fired up. But that means I stepped on more people's toes. I achieved targets, but I did it at the cost of other people. And in the end, then if you harm or hurt other people by being selfish and not caring so much, then you hurt yourself, and that's what happened to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel like I've had a long journey with my emotions, like not in the same way. Didn't hit a rock bottom, didn't have that same experience, but for me, it was very much around anger. Like I would get angry and upset at the smallest things at times. Take it out to my son, who was at that point in time like 2, maybe 3 years old. Take it out at colleagues at work. Definitely had high standards about how things should happen, like this is how we operate here, this is how we function. And if they showed up not living up to my expectations, essentially, or whether it was rules that the company agreed to, sort of the anger would be expressed towards other people. And so I think there's a part of us that understands that part, understands the tough part, understands like this is what you got to do, and you use your emotion potential to drive you into action. If you talk about vulnerabilities, that can refer to like a softer side of emotion. That can refer to opening up and sharing things that you're not so comfortable with. Have you got any advice for sort of people when it comes to that? Is it just about a safe space, or is there more to it potentially?
Yeah, I think it starts with a safe space, and then it takes time. I often speak about the vulnerability muscle. I say it's like you're building muscles in the gym. We need to take it step by step, and trust doesn't come easily. So now, for example, in our men's group, the current group I'm running now, we are a new crew for about 3.5 months, and I have one-on-one coaching with them in between the sessions. And then so they first open up with me. They share it perhaps for the first time. Many times it comes with a breakthrough and some pain. Sometimes there's cry. Sometimes this makes so much pain that it's a step back. But we come back to it and we work with it. And some of them even work with therapists or get counseling on the side as well to work with these as we uncover and unpack and go back in the past. And then when they then come in the group environment, they also share on it, and they share first how they feel and what they're doing, and most importantly they end by sharing and how they're dealing with it, so there's a positive spin from it. And by doing this, we just keep practicing every week until it becomes normal. I've had people sharing things that if 3 months ago they would never even consider sharing it with anyone, and there's been big secrets people have perhaps carried with them for a long time. I typically open the meeting by every week we have a different topic, right? So I open and I do a share on that topic about me. So if it's about financial insecurities, for example, I might share that when I was at my lowest point, I had unpaid credit cards here. I didn't pay my student loan there. I was behind on this and that. And I share that, and then I share how I overcame it. I came back and negotiated for a payback plan. It was so great when it was solved. So I share that, and by opening up, and then we go around, and then it becomes normalized, and they will also share what they was happening in their life, and that's the way we just train and practice us to be comfortable being vulnerable.
Mm. It's interesting that you explain it like that, because the space I operate in is maybe not the same space as you. So work on mental performance. And often I refer to it in the same way, that even that's practice. Your visualization about your next performance is practice. Your journaling is practice. Your breathing exercise that you maybe do, or meditation, that's practice. And so I think we often think of practice just as I have to go to the gym, or I have to go run, or I have to sit behind a book and learn. But there's a comfort, I think, with, or this is my sense of what you're saying, there's a comfort we can start finding in talking about our stuff. You know, if we're in the right place, and if we're in the right environment, or if we're just open enough to sharing, kind of like you and I, right? We strangers to each other, but you're happy to come on here and just talk about your stuff, and hopefully lots of people listen to this. So there is a comfort in yourself about your stuff that you feel free to sharing it.
Absolutely. And I learned also, for me, just like anyone else is training their vulnerability muscle in the men's group, me speaking today to you and the audience, I'm sharing my story again. I'm reflecting on this, and I'm talking it further, practicing my vulnerability muscle, getting comfortable with this, accepting my past, able to move forward. And I have very, very little regrets about my past, despite it's been a bumpy journey, because I dealt with it all. And sometimes it might be something that comes up that I haven't dealt with. And just recently, for example, I remember there was a job I ended a couple of years ago, and the way I walked out of that job was not very professional. And I took the chance to send an email to the gentleman who was the owner of the company, apologizing for my behavior, saying that I wasn't in the best space at that time, saying that I'm working on myself now, and I hope I'm better, and I'm sorry if I did any harm to you, and I wondered if there's anything I can do to make things right. His reply was basically very positive. He said, "Oh, I'm so glad to hear from you. Glad you're okay. I was worried about you. I could clearly say that you were not in a good space. And by the way, next time you're in town, let's catch up for a coffee." So that was something that I walked around with, and that pain came up to me suddenly. And instead of letting that pain be there, I dealt with it instantly. And it was not much effort from sending that email, but the reward is that I felt fantastic afterwards.
Mm. Is that an example of what you think we do with pain in our past? That things happen and come up, and we're not able to address it. And that could be speaking about it in that moment. It could be, kids nowadays have phones, right? They're young, but we don't have the tool or the skill or the understanding yet that that's actually what needs to happen, is that if we just get straight into the conversation, maybe we don't have the awareness yet, right? And you're gaining the awareness and the insights now, and you're kind of making up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. This was not something that came to me given. And I learned a lot then from the recovery program that followed, because since I had a drinking problem, I addressed that. And there's so many wonderful charities and recovery programs in the world, all over the world. And I'm pleased that I went through one, because I wanted to get it. I didn't want to pick up a drink again. And I went through it, and I learned a lot from that journey. And that set me up then on this amazing coaching journey, and this learning mindset that I just want to continue learn about myself and grow myself. And if that's the journey I'm on, that's the people I want to have around me as well. So that's why I'm very, very happy to share with you and the audience and covering this topic today.
Yeah. How do you see yourself now? Do you see yourself still as an alcoholic?
They say that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, that you need to remember that, because if you do pick up a drink again, you're back to where you started, or where you ended, I should say, a few years ago. So that is a message that resonated with me, and I've seen enough people relapse, and I see where that leads them. While it starts with a few drinks, it's not too long before they're back where indeed they ended. And that's not where I want to go. I have to remember and play the tape back to remember in 2018 when I was lying there with my swollen foot, writing my will and testament and thinking that life was over. And that is what I need to think about with my romance any day over a cold beer when I see it. It's just not for me. I've been there, done that, and I just have to accept that. It's just like you have an allergy to peanuts, and you know that you might die if you eat one. You wouldn't go and try one. So why would I do that with alcohol? I'm glad that the urge for it has been lifted from me, and I have no problems with it today. But the fear inside there is a natural fear, I guess, of death, and I don't want to go that way or even try it.
Yeah. Is that rock bottom? That realization that this is the end, potentially? Is that a way to potentially describe that?
Yeah, it is. And everyone have a different rock bottom, though. Some can go lower than others, and some go so low that they sadly are not with us today, right? So, but the issue is that if it's not enough pain, then the willingness to change might not be there. And especially if it's something radical, a big change, it's very painful to change as well. So, but if the pain is great, then as we call it in the world of recovery, then you have that pain of, the gift of desperation.
Yeah, that's words I've heard before. I'm curious what your thought is on that, right? Because I'm fascinated with your story in the sense that we always hear, and maybe some people that listen to the podcast have actual family members, right, that are going through similar stuff. Where, say somebody like me, I'm oblivious to this, right? To a certain extent, right? So if I hear your story, in my head, really it goes, well, you should have just quit earlier. Like, I don't get the struggle. I don't have that pain. I maybe have different pains. And so how do we, in everyday life, people who don't get to experience that level of pain, how do we make change? Or how do we adapt or adjust in your understanding?
Yeah, we can go through the same steps as I walked through also in the recovery program, and that the steps I have in my book is for the people who don't have that kind of issue or that kind of deep problem. And in fact, if you think about any 12-step recovery program, the first step is basically about the addiction, the social media, the eating, the sugar addiction, or the alcohol, or whatever it is. The other 11 steps is about the thinking. So if you talk about alcohol, for example, they typically say you come for the drinking, but you stay for the thinking. So it's the vast majority is mental work and getting the mindset right. And it's all about relationships. Relationships with other people either break you or make you feeling fulfilled and happy and so on. So it's about really, again, coming back to this, so anyone in their life who don't have an addiction, for example, can still think back, do I have some broken relationship? Is it something unsaid with my parents? Is it something there? Is it something with my sister or brother? And in my case, there was with the sister. There was one incident where she gave a Coke to my son when he was 5 years of age at the lunch table, and he had never had sugar in his life. It was the first time. And I looked away and suddenly I saw him and I got very, very angry. I couldn't deal with that emotion. I grabbed my son and stormed off the table, and I didn't talk to my sister for over a year after that. And I didn't take her calls. And that was my way of responding. I didn't know how to respond at that time.
I mean, that sounds, and I'm sorry for saying it like that, but that sounds like extreme, right? It sounds like real extreme, potentially avoidance, of wanting, resolving an issue. And I can imagine that life would have been tough then, because life throws things at us like that. Life throws curveballs. It changes all the time. It's evolving all the time. And so I think I'm starting to get a sense of what you mean by I was running away from myself, that it was the response to the things outside, and that you didn't have the tools or the abilities to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think also I remember that lunch particularly. Well, I had quite a lot of pressure for myself. I had 2 days later my first full distance Ironman event, something I trained for 1 or 2 years by then. So there was a lot of pressure, a lot of insecurities, and at that time then not being completely well mentally. And even for that, I trained without really being vulnerable, open, not learning the best from the coaches. These days I'm really absorbing everything. I try to do everything myself. So the pressure I would put on my shoulders back then was just so huge. So it just took a small incident and then I would go off the rail. And it was a lot of unfixed, broken things in me at that time. I had not been open or honest to talk to anyone about my feelings and the past until that juncture. There was just too much pressure internally.
What was like the biggest thing that you weren't speaking about?
Feelings, I would say, in general, all kind of feelings, but also having not repaired relationship. That the incident there with my sister was just one example. There would be many more of those small incidents. I would never, hadn't hit anyone or done any crime on someone. That was not the issue. It was more like that, walking out of a job without really the last. Yeah, let's say I worked there for a year and I done quite okay. Then the last 2 minutes of walking out of there might have been avoiding something related to feelings, a close conversation, just walking out, and suddenly they wonder what happened. Didn't even say goodbye. We just worked together a year, and then they would so destroy everything you've done over a long time with some small incident. That was typically me, and I didn't come back and repair it. I just walked forward and carried it all with me.
And was there specific feelings? Was it like a shame or anger, or was it just a mix, or not even sure exactly what it was?
It's shame and guilt, definitely. And then when you don't have the tools and you carry it with you, definitely shame and guilt was something that I had a lot of, and I had to let go of all of this, which I learned then in the program to do. When I joined this program, then basically I cleaned the whole past of that, and then these days I try to do it. And this is chapter 4 of my book is about nurturing healthy relationships, where I am explaining that at the end of every day, I do an inventory list where I think over and write down, was it someone I said something which wasn't quite nice? Did I send an email to someone? I really go over my whole day and do that inventory. And if there's something I did that could potentially be harm to another person, before I go to bed, I make a quick call or send a message and apologize for that behavior and say, I will give you a call tomorrow. I'm sorry that didn't come out quite right. So that's the end of the day, but I'm trying to do that instantly now. So if I go into a supermarket and I'm stressed, rushing, and I say something that is not nice to the cashier, I will try to instantly grab myself and say, sorry, that didn't come out right. I apologize, and then be nice.
You know, I have a huge appreciation for that, because I think that's an awareness that I've only had recently as well, is the importance of sort of making up, and not, if I can call it that, right? And it's not so much about the other person, really. It's more about how I get to feel. And I know that seems selfish, right? I know that seems selfish, but I think it's also in the name of good relationships. It definitely isn't that, but it is, for me, it's normally the payoff for myself. Like, yeah, those, what you said earlier, like a problem shared is a problem halved, or something like that. So it's the same idea, you know, like, it's almost like when you resolve it, you release the tension on your shoulders, or you take the baggage, that the weight that could feel so heavy on your shoulders, and you take that off. And so it resonates really well with me. And I think there's a lot in that, even for people that don't necessarily have huge addictions or huge problems in their lives, you know, just healthy everyday living. Yeah. What is mental health to you? If you hear those words, like,
yeah, I think for me, mental health cannot work in isolation. For me, mental health, emotional health, and physical health is all interlinked. And the only issue is that we are very scared about talking about our mental health and emotional health with other people. There's so much stigma there, so much fear. And I did research on that for my book when I wrote it. And I asked people, for example, will you talk about your mental health in the company if you have any issues? And here in Asia, at least where I did a survey then in Singapore, 84% said that they will not talk to their company if they have mental health issues or problems. Worse, 75% wouldn't seek help for it. So that's where the stigma lies, and that's where I was, and that's why I was terrified of getting that help. And you asked before, do we have to hit rock bottom? What about before? Well, that's the issue. We are not willing to ask for help or speak to anyone about it. We're covering it up until the pain is so great that we hit that gift of desperation, and that's the issue with this. If people have a broken arm, we'll go and seek help right away. There's no stigma there, and that's where we need to bridge the gaps.
Yeah, people can't see our brokenness in that way, right? We can put a smile on our face and people think we're happy, but people can see your arms broken, your skin might go purple or blue, there'll be the swelling, but we don't get to see people's internal pain. I wonder if I at times wonder if if let's say you were feeling shame, on your forehead the word appeared, or you had a light that shone green, or whatever it might be, right? Then maybe we'd be more open to speaking about these things, because everybody could see, oh, okay, you're busy experiencing this, and then we could ask about it. But so often we just see the behavior, but we actually don't know what's driving it. We don't know what's sitting behind the scenes. We don't know the story. We don't know the background. And so it's easy to make assumptions about people where they, this guy's always friendly and he's the life of the party, But now all of a sudden we heard he wanted to go commit suicide. Like, what's that about? And I think sort of part of what you're sharing for me sort of reminds me of that idea that, and through those stats, definitely, that people do that. They hide essentially the stuff on the inside in fear of maybe what other people are going to think about them, those stigmas that live out there. Yeah, maybe in the name of making the conversation a little bit easier, if you think of the clients that you work with, what are like the 2 or 3 biggest insecurities that people have that they eventually get to share that would make the biggest difference?
Yeah, I'm working mainly with either entrepreneurs or senior executives, and I think one common thing I see in them is that a lot of them, and including how I was, are insecure overachievers. Society set us up so the first we have parents who drive us. Perhaps you got to study hard, and do the things you should. They parent us. Then at school, our teachers are there to make sure that we deliver. Then we come into the workplace, we have the targets and bonuses, and the bosses are driving us to hit even better results. So we live in this world which is completely absorbed by winning and getting the trophies. And talking about sports, you just look at any final, the winner walking off with the trophy, cheering, being happy, but even the silver medalists many times are crying. They're not happy. And that's sort of how we approach our workplace many times. So perhaps there's no wonder there will be more losers than winners out there. And there will always be people who are, and this fuels a lot of insecurity and anxiety in people by feeling, am I good enough? And then we live in a world where job security is not for granted. There's no longer that people work 30 years and get a Rolex watch. We live in a gig economy, so there's no security. People don't feel safe. And then it's a natural reflex to that we all feel insecure, and we're walking around being around insecure people.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised it in that way. And I've been wanting to sort of speak about the sport part a little bit, because that's my biggest game, and that's where my real interest lies. But at the same point in time, it's been sort of good listening to you, because I think at the end of the day, we work with human beings, right? And so it doesn't really matter if you're an athlete or if you're a manager in a corporate space. You're a human being, and so your pressures and your things might be different on the outside, but I think the internal experiences are very much the same.
It is, and I can say that where I'm living and working from now, specifically in Phuket, Thailand, I live in an Ironman athlete training camp. Some of the best athletes in the world, the professionals, The ones from Asia, the best from every country are here trying to qualify for the Olympics. They train here, Asian Games, those are here. I was out cycling with them this morning. So I'm completely surrounded by all these athletes because being a sports person, been a big part of my life. I played golf at university at high level as captain and president, and then after that I picked up triathlon. And I mean, the pressures are huge on the shoulders also of these here, especially the kids who are 17 to 20 years old trying to qualify. Big pressure from the parents being sent here and so on. And there also, I'm giving back by coaching them, and I'm a volunteer and a coach to help them thinking about the life after sport or besides sport. We have rules for them that they need to study a language, for example. They need to get a part-time job so that they are ready for, if they're not going to make it in the sport, then they have something else to stand on. And otherwise, I see many sport stars once they retire who go down the journey that I did otherwise. So indeed, it's very, very relevant.
I have an idea, and I think for the first time I can verbalize it, because it's been sitting in the back of my mind, but I think I can verbalize it for the first time, maybe in a slightly better way. And it's sort of come through this conversation, sort of being okay with who you are, being okay with how good you are, to me goes a long way towards mental health. Well, this is my understanding, right? That if I am the best in the world, being okay with being the best in the world. In other words, I am here. I am living this life. I am earning this income. I'm fortunate to have this experience. I've got these skills. I think it's a much healthier place to come from than to sort of want to be something different, or to let the pressures affect you to the point of you going like, I'm not okay. In the same way, and this was a realization for me, a big one for me over the last couple of years, was I think I'm just an average guy. I think I'm fairly good at a lot of things. You know, I can coach cricket pretty well. I wouldn't say I've produced, but I've been fortunate to journey with some young kids, and they're phenomenal cricketers now, and they play on the world stage. And I've been fortunate that I could do that and sort of enhanced my skills and my abilities. In the mental space, I'm fortunate that I get to work with international athletes. But at the end of the day, I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm not the best in the world. There's no, and so my head might think I want to be the best in the world. And then that will bring a sense of pressure on me personally, right? And so I had to sort of say, well, I'm okay with where I'm at in my life. And so if I get to coach at a higher level, I can be okay with that too. I'm okay where I'm now. And so it takes away that, for me, it took away that sense of I have to achieve, I have to achieve, I have to achieve, because it's almost like I'm not okay with where I'm now. And I'm not saying don't have the dream, don't have the goal. We can push towards something, but if we're not okay with where we're at now, then I think we struggle. Then I think we enhance the pains and the struggles more than we maybe need to.
I completely agree with you. And as we're talking, I'm sitting in the smallest and most basic apartment I lived in my entire life. Perhaps my first one when I was 17 and moved out from my parents' home. I rented a very expensive, nice place to piss off my dad, and and it was always something, right? And wherever I lived over my own standards, over what I could afford, and for me, coming from Sweden, the home is important. So the car, getting a flashy car was not really on my list, but the home was very important. It's no longer important to me. I'm fine with having something basic. I'd rather have low financial insecurities around it than walking around being stressed around trying to have something which I cannot really afford.
It resonates very well with me, because my sense about this is we build sandcastles. Like, that's the words I use for it. So we go around life building up these things to look like how we think the outside world wants us to look. So I got to drive this car, live in that suburb, a house that looks like this. My children must go to that school. And I often wonder, I'm sure there's people that have all of that, right? And are okay with life. I'm sure they exist. My sense is that most people are not. The large proportion of people, they're living this life in the sandcastle world where they're sort of just building these things up. and they do their best to keep the sandcastle together when it rains. Oh shucks, the sand's disappearing now, I got to build my castle back up again. And it creates so much stress and panic and worry in life that actually we're not able to perform at our best. We're actually not. So if you think of an athlete, like if you're carrying all of that, and now you got to go on a swimming event or a cycling event or a cricket game or a rugby field or a golf course, you're bringing life stress with you rather than I'm okay with my life. I can have the freedom to go perform. And so I think this has been sitting in the back of my head all this time. Is often I think there's this perception that if we're as men or human beings start getting into our insecurities, that makes us soft and performance will suffer. Because performance is tough. It's a tough environment. It's a very physical thing that you've got to go do. You got to pedal that bike. You got to swim. You got to stand there in front of 1,000 people, maybe hit a cricket ball, kick a rugby ball, whatever it might be. And so often I think that the perception is if I get into my insecurities, that's me going weak. That's me going soft, versus saying, actually, if you deal with that stuff, you free yourself up to go perform. You free yourself up to go do that physical thing with nothing holding you back or less holding you back.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, with all the measurable tools we have today and smart devices and everything we wear when we perform in training and in competition, I can note the big difference if I'm in a good space mentally and so on. It really affects the physical performance as well, and that's why I said it's all interlinked and how we feel about things and the ability then to repair things. And even if you have an argument with your girlfriend or wife when you're on your way to a match, that's going to be on the back of your head, and it will take up a lot of energy, and certainly you won't be able to perform at your best.
Mm. What would you say was the biggest tool that you learned that's helping you in everyday life?
It was the ability to repair relationships, really what we discussed today. Really, yeah. And the first step then in my book is to take stock on this. So you really get out the spreadsheet and you write down all the people where you have some resentments and some people you have harmed from all your life, from childhood and up, and really go spend a few days a week on that and make that list. And then to go over the list and just think if you can go back to them and make amends. We don't want to go back and made amends perhaps to someone who's remarried or something, so we cause harm to another person. But if it's possible, try to go back and make amends, and especially to our parents and anyone close around us. If there's something there that you said that wasn't nice, that you still carry, set it right. And then the feeling from having done that is just amazing.
Sure. Nick, I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for giving us your insights and a little bit of your story and a little bit of what it is that people can go through, and knowing that we don't have to be so lonely, right? I think that's sort of been the recurring message throughout this is, go to your relationships, go mend them, go fix them, pay attention, especially to the ones that's closest to you. And maybe not just that, right? There could be other things in the past too. And don't be afraid to talk about your emotions and find that safe space and the trusty people that you can go and share things with and to without it harming you, so that you can remedy those things and live a better, more free life.
Yeah, thank you for covering this very important conversation. It's been a pleasure to be on your show.
Cool. Nick, if people want to reach out to you, if they resonate with this in any way, what would be the best ways for them to do that?
Well, for a start, they can go to Amazon if they like to read a book or listen to it on Audible. It's called Executive Loneliness. Otherwise, my website is nickjonsson.com, and it's spelled NickJonsson.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nick. I really appreciate you being here.
Likewise. Thank you.